Tonight's thumbnail was crafted by Carolyn Eklund. Check out more of her work through the links in the description. Good evening, Night Watchers. We are looking for real Jersey Devil sightings. Submit your own at darknessprevails.org. And if yours is the creepiest, you could win a $50 Amazon gift card. Now, who's in the mood for some Goatman stories? You will never see him coming. This world is a strange one. The Goatman is a very recent and strange phenomenon. It is said to be a beast that stands like a man, with an upper body resembling a human's, but its lower half is that of a goat. But not every Goatman story is goaty. The Goatman has been known to change shape. It can shift its form to be that of anyone you may know. It will do anything to get in at you. So, prepare yourself. Here are 5 real stories of Goatman attacks. If you're in the woods alone, rethink your priorities. Number 1. Was it the Goatman? By Regular Decaf. My family used to live in an old trailer out in the woods in southern Missouri. We never had much money, but we did the best we could. Honestly though, I hated living out there. The place was run down before we even got it. Trash in the yard that wasn't ours, and leaky pipes that ended up rotting out in a few spots in the walls of the place. It always smelled of mildew, and the nearest neighbor was about 3 miles down the road. So I guess the only good part about the place was how quiet it was. Don't get me wrong, I am very grateful to my parents. They did the best they could with the money they made. Even after the struggling finances and shoddy living situation, my family had the most miserable time at that trailer. And I believe it was because of the Goatman. Now hear me out. So many different events occurred that both terrified and traumatized my family that seemed to have no explanation. But after reading so much about this Goatman on the internet, despite how unbelievable it sounds, I believe I may have found the answer to what haunted us so many years ago. The following experiences happened from 1991 to 1995. In 91, I was 11 years old. At the time, we had just moved in. Unemptied boxes littered the place, and a feeling of excitement and anxiety were shared amongst my parents and me. The place was a downgrade. My father had been laid off, and we were forced to move. So, when we weren't a bit excited about being out in the country for the first time in our lives, there was tension about bills or groceries and mortgage. All in all, I was happy with the move. I was just a kid. If there were trees to climb, I was fine, and the woods around the place were abundant with trees ripe for the climbing. I do remember the day we were assigned a chore list. I thought for sure it was one of those things they tried to enforce that never really held up, like no more fast food, or no more soda, or no more staying up past 10. With that assumption, I was completely wrong. One of my new chores was simply taking out the trash to a makeshift wire bin about 20 yards from the house. Easy peasy, right? Well, I've always been a bit of a procrastinator. What I should have done during the day, I ended up doing just before bed. I don't think most people understand just how dark it gets out there away from the city, especially during a new moon. Good luck seeing just a few inches in front of your face. I stepped slowly off the rotting wood porch, massive trash bags sloshing around behind me. The fear didn't hit all at once. It had been with me all day. This was my problem. If only I had taken it out earlier. 20 yards. Without hesitation or looking behind me, I ran toward the makeshift dumpster. Every step of my own sounded far too loud. And for a faint moment, I thought I heard another pair of footsteps stomping the ground with my own. 10 yards. I assumed it was merely my active imagination, my fear running wild. But the first clomp of a footstep that was out of sync with my own confirmed that I was not alone out there, and that I was not the only thing running. 5 yards. I was already too close to turn back. The trash bin was so close, Going back now would result in me getting chewed out for being lazy or afraid of the dark. Apparently, these are bad reasons for not being able to do my chores. The clomping sounded closer. God, I could feel a presence just behind me. It sounded so close. The bin was close enough. I threw the bag in, hoping that it landed inside the wide opening at the top. It hit the edge of the wire, ripping the bag in tween and spilling its contents. Thankfully, they fell into the bin. Somehow not thinking about the presence I had just heard, I turned to run back to safety. I regret that split-second decision every day of my life. I wish I had circled back. I wish I had taken the long way to the back door, but no. I turned around to retrace those very same steps that had been followed by something. There in front of me, literally only inches from my face, was a creature about twice my height. It was covered in long, coarse hair that smelled of urine and soil. When I had turned around, the thing pulled its hand away, the hand itself that had been reaching out toward me. I saw 5 dirty fingers, black nails on the tips. I stumbled backward immediately, falling on my ass and crawling away backward. I never broke eye contact with the creature before me. It shifted, its dirty fur coat ruffling as it did. That's when I noticed the curled horns on top of its head. Before I could scream, the thing turned toward the forest's edge and bounded away. In my fear, my anxiety, I assumed that I had just seen some sort of weird Bigfoot, but the sight of its inversely jointed legs and cloven hooves assured me that this was something far different. Something worse. Oddly enough, eyes wide open, staring into those woods, I could only walk back inside the house, shutting and locking the door. Maybe I was in shock. I mean, I've heard, read, and seen people's supposed accounts of some strange beast walking across the road as they were driving. But Jesus Christ, something twice my size and probably 4 times my weight had reached out to me, tried to reach out and touch me. Sleep was something I could not achieve for a while after that. I tried to catch up on my sleep at school whenever possible. Needless to say, it definitely affected my grades. My parents never knew about it. As far as I know, I didn't bother to tell them. They'd probably just laugh at me anyway. I wish I was joking. I wish it was the only encounter with that thing that I had. About 3 months after that, which was plenty of time for me to forget that incident, to convince myself that it was just a terrible, realistic dream, my parents decided to go out one night for a date night. I was pretty excited. I loved being home alone. Nobody around to stop me from doing whatever stupid thing I decided to do, which ended up just being me playing Game Boy on the couch. They said their goodbyes, I love yous, and don't go into our bedroom unless you want to be scarred for life. You know, the usual parent stuff. The moment they shut that door, I grabbed my Game Boy and started blasting blocks on Tetris. Eventually, I fell asleep, Game Boy in my lap and the TV still quietly playing in the background. Crash. It sounded like something big had just shattered into pieces. I jumped up, hazy and half asleep. It was silent. I've had dreams before that jerked me back to life after a loud sudden thud in my head. At first, I thought this was that I had just been dreaming and heard a thud in my dream. But it was a shattering sound. I sat there motionless, staring into the hallway just beyond the open kitchen. It stayed quiet for several moments later. After a while, I decided that it was nothing and started to close my eyes. I jumped up the moment I heard my parents' bedroom door open. The door itself was beyond the hallway, which was behind another door, so I knew something was coming. I just couldn't see it, not until the hallway door opened. I knew better than to wait for that to happen. Whatever it was coming quickly. I didn't have time to think. I ran to the sink, opened the cabinet below it, and hid. I barely fit, but luckily, I was able to shut the doors. To see the intruder, I left a crack in the cabinet doors, not too much though. I didn't want it to look obvious that I was looking through the crack. I heard the hallway door open. My heart ached with every beat. Never before have I felt so terrified. Someone was in the house with me. Some burglar or thief had broken in through the large window in my parents' room. Clomp, clomp, clomp. The sound was heavy and close. Those footsteps did not sound like the boots of a thief. In fact, they sounded familiar. Clomp, clomp. Before I could connect that sound to where I had once heard it, the sight of tall, hairy legs stepping onto the linoleum took my breath away. That creature from before. It was inside my home. For far too long, those legs did not move. It was right in front of the sink, just standing and waiting as if it knew where I was. Finally, the thing did move. It stepped heavily toward the living room where only seconds ago I had been sleeping. I tried not to think about what might have happened had I been asleep still. I could hear it breathing, sniffing the air. How could it not know I was there? Surely it could smell me. It just kept sniffing and walking around the living room. Now I could only listen. My vision was exclusive to the kitchen directly ahead. All I could make out were a few legs of the kitchen table. The feeling of hearing and not seeing, it was torture. The steps were coming again. Loud, calm, everything I wasn't at that moment. It took every ounce of my strength just to hold back from screaming. For another treacherous moment, those demonic legs stood in front of me. This time, though, they stepped away quickly. Soon those heavy steps faded away. I had no idea if that thing was out of the house, but I had to do something. I crawled out from under the sink and raced toward the hallway. I reached to close the door, and the moment I did, that thing's face, horns and all, emerged from the darkness of the room across the way. Slamming the door shut, I grabbed the kitchen chair next to me and lodged it under the doorknob. It didn't hold like they show in the movies. The moment that creature hit the door from the other side, the chair slid forward until friction finally worked its magic. Through the small gap in the partially open door, I could see nothing but the darkness of my parents' open bedroom. Suddenly, all was calm, quiet. Yet I was more scared than before. I backed up to the end of the living room, where my bedroom door was. I couldn't move beyond there. I had to make sure that thing couldn't escape. If it did, I made sure I had enough time to escape into my room and lock the door. Hopefully the lock would hold. Still, though, the door didn't shake, move, or jounce. The thing that had hit the door, it was as if it was no longer there. I waited for painful ages, and nothing. I slid down to the floor, weak and sore from adrenaline. I forced myself not to blink. I just stared at that door. "Daniel." My mother's voice rang softly from the hallway. My back grew rigid. My mouth hung agape. "Daniel, come here. Open this door, please." That wasn't my mother. It couldn't have been my mother, unless my parents returned home and crawled through the broken window in their room. It didn't make any sense. Maybe I was going crazy. "Open the door. Open it now. Open it. Open it. Open it. Daniel, open it now." The voice grew louder and louder, becoming a low, rumbling shout rather than the sweet, melodic voice of my mother. "Daniel!" Another voice like the one before came from the front door. "Get the door, hon. We got a little too many leftovers." It was my parents. I stood quickly, both thankful and afraid that my parents had finally come home. The moment I took a step toward the front door, I felt the floor tremble with impossibly heavy footsteps as the thing in the hallway ran back toward my parents' room. I ran to the door and opened it. There, my mother and father stood with several doggy bags over each arm. "Oh, thank goodness. Now take one of these." Before she could finish, I was behind them, pushing them into the house. Once inside, I locked the door and reinforced the hallway door with another chair, like it would help. "What are you doing?" my father asked, placing the doggy bags on the table. He loved his Italian food. "Somebody broke in," I stuttered a reply. I could tell by the look on his face that he didn't believe me. That is, until he really looked at me. I was shaking, staring off into the distance, barely able to stand. He suddenly got very serious. He grabbed the rifle from the gun rack in the living room, and then he moved the chairs from the hallway door. My mother held on to me as we both stood quietly, knowing how tense the situation was. Well, they didn't truly know. They didn't really understand. Even when my father found long, coarse hair on the broken glass of their bedroom window. They didn't know that there was no burglar, no thief, no thug. Something had broken into the house to get to me. Years passed. I became a high schooler. Girls became more interesting than Game Boys. Sooner than I ever thought, those traumatic events with that nightmarish creature disappeared from my mind. Maybe I was suppressing them to keep myself sane. Maybe I just honestly believed that that was the last of it. God, I was naive. My mother died 40 years young in 1995. She was a great mother, a happy woman, but a terrible eater. Heart disease was a terrible beast, especially for a short, chubby woman who refused to change her ways. My father and I continued to live. It was a quiet life. We ate healthier and we respected one another. The circumstances of my life made me stern and mature, a 16-year-old acting like a middle-aged man. Our only disagreements came when my father went to church. He'd go every Wednesday and Sunday, and he'd do everything in his power to try to convince me to go. I'd say no. I had my reasons not to believe in God. The God of the Christian Bible, that is. He didn't like it, but quietly he accepted my decision. It was a Sunday afternoon. He was getting ready to leave for the afternoon service. You know, it'd make you happier believing in something, he would always tell me. He had said that same thing that Sunday evening. Yeah, I know, I replied, trying not to sound rude. I just don't believe in that. He nodded and walked out. That evening was quiet. The fall trees reflected a gold hue through the window shades. It was nice and made the homework I was catching up on much easier to focus on. About an hour or two after my dad left, there was a banging on the door. I smiled. Dad, you forget your key again? The knocking continued. I got up, rolling my eyes. I'm coming, Dad. You gotta stop taking the key off your ring. Daniel, come here. Open the door, please. It was my mother's voice, spoken the same as I had heard it so long ago. I stumbled backward, choking on air that I simply couldn't catch. Daniel, open it, open it, open it, open it, now! That dread from years ago flooded me deeper than before. This fucking thing, using my mother's voice to get to me. Disgusting, and my father was still out there. He could come home at any second. Go away, I screamed at the door, but the knocking grew louder and more rapid. Get the fuck out of here! Stop it! Without realizing, I stood up and ran at the door. I have no idea what I was thinking, what I was expecting. I guess the idea of my mother's sweet voice being a most terrifying, sinister noise. It got to me, because as I grabbed and began to turn the doorknob, I could feel the regret welling up inside me. Why did I turn that knob? In an instant, I opened the door. My heart seemed to stop, and a blinding light filled my gaze. Son? I flinched from the light and fell onto my knees. Are you okay? My father shut the car door, the headlights flicking off. He ran toward me, the memory of that night so many days ago fresh in his eyes. He had seen me like that once before. He picked me up and set me on the couch. He locked all the doors and grabbed his gun. I tried to fight that catatonic state. My heart beat wildly, slow, then fast, hard, then subtle. My father spoke again. Pack your things. I managed to look over at him. I know there was no burglar here that night. He wiped the sweat from his brow and swallowed hard. before continuing. You weren't the only one who saw it. Number 2. Goatman Attack. Submitted by Just Plain Screwed. Back in the mid-90s, I would run tree limbs along a long winding road in the backwoods of Kentucky in my old Ford pickup. Growing up there, I heard countless stories of strange things. These stories were usually your typical creature-in-the-woods sightings. But for my 30 years of living there at the time, not once had I seen anything strange. And believe me, I drove through and worked in the woods on a daily basis. I was so sure that if I was going to see something weird, I would have already seen it. I was dead wrong. We were finishing up loading some tree limbs into my pickup. The last part of the day was packing in the wood and driving it cross-county. I loved it. The scenery was beautiful. I got to listen to my music, and just being alone with my thoughts was nice. That evening, as the sun set above the tree line, I was just passing an old wide pasture. In the distance on the road ahead of me, I could see a large black mound on the side of the road, just next to the barbed wire fence separating the road from the pasture. I slowed down as I got closer. I was in no hurry, and my curiosity got the better of me. As I got closer, the sight of the thing made me a bit nervous. Of course, driving up on the dead body of an animal would make anyone nervous, right? On the side of the road, a black cow lay dead. Its eyes bulged from their sockets as flies repeatedly landed and flew from its cornea. I drove up a little closer. It was a little morbid of me, but I wanted to know what might have killed the thing. There were tufts of fur hanging from some of the barbs on the fence beside it, as if the thing had tried to run through or jump over it. As for the body, I couldn't find any marks or blood. Maybe it died of a heart attack. Maybe something had chased it. Mischievous dogs and coyotes were rampant in these parts after all. I put the truck back in drive. Before I could push down on the accelerator, I heard a thud. My truck suddenly jounced back and forth. Something had fallen into the bed of my pickup. Immediately, I turned toward my back window. The sun had almost completely set by this time, and I couldn't make out much, save for the red-tinted bark of the branches closest to the glass, highlighted ominously by the brake light. I waited, still staring into the bed. I had heard something. Searching with my eyes, I could not find anything out of place. Then, my eyes locked onto something I didn't recognize. It looked like a patch of grass or fur. I could see its follicles catching in the wind. For a moment, I thought it may have been grass and soil we may have pulled up while throwing in the branches. When whatever it was attached to lifted itself up and stood on 2 legs, I feared for my life. But I could not help but watch in wonder and horror as this thing leaned forward, revealing itself in the faint red brake light. Yes, my foot was on the brake this whole time. In the 3 or so seconds that I watched this thing loom ever closer to my rear window, I made out exactly what I was looking at. The creature, and it was definitely no man. It was covered in dirty, matted fur from head to toe. Its legs didn't bend the way a human's do. They looked bent or twisted at the knees. Toward its upper body, the fur grew thin to the point I could see skin underneath, and its face. Oh God, it made my skin crawl. It looked both human and beast at the same time. All at once, my fear got the best of me. Without looking, I stomped the gas pedal on the floor. The truck took off, and I watched the creature jump out of the bed and land in the middle of the road, unscathed by the sudden acceleration. It just stood there, a silhouette growing dark in the distance. The damn thing had to have been at least 6 feet tall. It towered over the barbed wire fence on the side of the road. I have no idea what happened that night. I can easily tell you that my drives through that area are no longer fun. As I pass through that pasture, I feel like I'm being watched. I can't help but drive a little faster when I'm in that area. Did that dead cow have anything to do with my experience? I feel like this creature had set me up, like it had laid a trap for me. Maybe I'm overthinking it. I wish I never would have stopped. Never have I been so afraid, especially in the place that has been my home all my life. I hope to God I don't break down on that road. Number 3. Goatman on the Road. Submitted by 123 Crypt Key. Cabins are so creepy. I guess it's my fault, though, for letting myself get creeped out by something that's supposed to be a vacation getaway. But I can't help but think about all the dozens of stories I've read online about creepy experiences at cabins. I can say for sure that I never thought I'd experience something for myself. My friend Laura and I decided to go up to my grandma's cabin one weekend during the winter. The cabin was deep in the woods of North Dakota. It was a beautiful place. I often stayed there with my grandparents as a child. Now, I was in college, and it was time to relax after some pain-in-the-ass finals. The first night was exactly what I hoped it would be. We played video games, talked, and laughed. I spent the morning drinking coffee and reading a book on the couch. I wish I could spend every day like that. Well, it wasn't until night that things got a little weird. "Hey, Melissa." Laura called to me as she walked inside. She had just gone to the gas station in my Jeep to get some cigarettes. "What's up?" I asked. When I walked around the corner, I noticed she had entered through the front door backwards, keeping her eyes on something just beyond the glass of the door. "Do you see it?" she murmured. I almost didn't hear her. I leaned over and looked out of the living room window. All I saw was the snow-covered road that emerged from the woods and led up to the driveway. "I don't see what—" Before I could finish, a tall, dark silhouette stepped from the tree line by the road on the right and onto the road itself. It had a long stride. In 2 steps it had crossed nearly onto the other side of the road. It just stopped there. We could see it turning in every direction. "Who the hell is that?" You could hear the confusion in Laura's voice. "I have no idea. There's no cabins anywhere close to here. That gas station is the closest thing to us, and it's a 20-minute drive out." My mind was reeling. Who's the guy just standing there out in the driveway? The figure then turned back toward the tree line from which it had originated and took 2 long steps. It disappeared quickly into the woods. I threw on my jacket and boots. Without a word, Laura did the same. We have always been a curious pair. Fear always came second to our curiosity. Maybe that's why I can read hours of scary stories. Anyway, we stepped out onto the driveway and headed toward the beginning of the road that entered the woods. The snow itself was at least 8 inches deep. As soon as we stood where that man was, we saw the tracks on the ground. Hooves. There were obvious hoof prints on the ground like a ram or sheep had been walking around. We did not see anyone or anything but that man a few seconds ago. Unless he was walking a goat or something that was bleach white like the snow, there were no animals out there. We looked at each other and quickly walked back inside. Together, we sat on the couch and warmed ourselves with the fireplace. The TV played MTV something or other, but we both couldn't help but feel a little odd. Eventually, it escaped my mind, and I was able to fall asleep pretty easy. But loud stomping in the middle of the night forced me back to life. Thud, thud, thud. I couldn't make out where it was coming from, but it yanked me from my sleep. Droopy-eyed, I peeked out of the windows of my room. It snowed lightly outside, but I didn't see anyone out there. It must have been Laura stomping down the hallway to get a glass of water. She had never been very light-footed. Thud, thud, thud. The sound came again, and I knew immediately that the sound was not coming from within the house. Now wide-eyed, I got up with my blanket and headed toward the living room. It must have been a full moon that night, because the windows shone with quite a bit of light, enough that I could make out the details of the tree line through the windows. I stepped quietly into the living room. Laura was already there, kneeling behind the recliner with her face peeking over it. Before I could ask what the hell she was doing, a tall silhouette appeared behind the curtains of the window. Thud, thud, thud. Someone was on our porch. They walked back and forth from the door to the window over and over again. It looked like he was trying to peek through, trying to find a gap in the curtains. Instinctively, I darted over to the recliner and ducked next to Laura. "He's been there for the last hour," she whispered to me, even though I doubt he could hear us. Mouth open, I watched in horror as this figure walked around our porch, stomping far too loudly than I thought possible. I figured the boots or shoes of anyone would have crunched with all that snow. We didn't have an awning out there. Then he stomped back over to the door and started pounding with his fist. And I'm not talking violently knocking. He was trying to break down the freaking door. I couldn't keep myself from shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. That's when we heard the loudest, weirdest sounding scream. There's no way that was human. The scream literally lasted for the duration of a minute. 60 seconds at least of some otherworldly screech. As quickly as it started, it stopped. No stomping, no screaming. All but the howling of the wind had become silent. We didn't go back to our rooms, and we didn't go to sleep. We sat there together, hunched in the floor all night. As soon as daylight broke through those thankfully thick curtains, we packed up and left. I have no idea what we saw out there, but there were hundreds of footprints on our porch. There wasn't a single human footprint in the snow outside, save for our own. Whether that thing was human or not, I want to know one thing. Where the hell did those hoofprints come from? Number 4. The Goatman is Real by Envy Us. This is a short but terrifyingly true experience that occurred when I was about 11 or 12 years old. I grew up on a Navajo reservation in Utah. Often, the older guys would go out to a nearby bluff to camp out. I was never allowed to go with them. They were grown-ups, my mother told me. I was just too young. But the older I grew, the more I wanted to go with them. So, one night, I snuck out and followed them out there. It was maybe a 30-minute walk out, and it took everything I had to be quiet enough to not get caught. After an excruciating walk, we made it to the bluff. It was beautiful at night. I had never been there after dark. There had to have been thousands of stars in the sky. It's crazy how different and beautiful everything seemed to be merely half an hour away from my home. Well, now that I was there and the guys were setting up camp, I honestly had no idea what I was going to do. I never thought about it. Did I really expect to just wait out there all night and sleep in the nearby woods? So I decided, once they settled in, I'd make myself known and face the repercussions in the morning. I heard a twig snap behind me. My heart pounded, and I turned to face whatever was there. It was my older brother. I wanted to... I stammered for an excuse. He shushed me with a weird smile on his face. I turned back toward the group in front of me. My brother's friends were putting together a campfire, and my brother was pitching the... Wait. My older brother was setting up the tent, but he was also behind me? I immediately turned around. My brother, no, this impersonator, was now beside me, standing over the bushes as if he didn't care if the others saw him. He stared at the campsite. I was too afraid to move or scream. I sat there waiting and hoping this thing would go away. He was so close. Who knows what might have happened if I would have yelled for my real brother. I don't know why I glanced at his feet, but that's when I couldn't help but jump backward, away from the demon before me. He didn't have feet. He had hooves like a goat. I had heard stories of skinwalkers, even stories of the Goatman. I thought they were just that, stories. But that night on my back on the ground, tears welling up in my eyes, I stared at a being that wasn't my brother. Nor was it human. I got up and ran harder than I thought I could, not caring whether that thing chased me or not. I ran until I gripped my older brother's waist in a tight hug. I could feel the guy's eyes on me, but at least I was away from that thing. They knew I was scared. I could hear them asking me why I was crying instead of wondering why I wasn't at home. They drove me home that night and never ratted me out. I never spoke of that night, not even with my brother. No one would believe me anyway. But even so, after all these years, I still can't help but wince whenever my brother smiles at me. Number 5. Real Goatman Encounter by College Foliage. This will be short but sweet. Well, it won't be sweet at all. This memory haunts me daily. I live in a very mountainous region in Colorado. I love going hiking in the snow, no matter how much snow there might be. I've been a passionate hiker since I was a teenager. One of these hikes, though, the snow seemed to be coming down hard. It's a gamble to hike during the snow. As soon as it seems to be getting rough, it's time to head back. So that's just what I did. But that day, when I did turn back to go toward the opening of the trail, a figure stood before me. It was about 5 feet tall, had dark, messy fur, and it smelled strongly of piss. I was taken aback when I saw it. The thing resembled a dark mountain goat, but I swear to you, this fucker was standing on its hind legs. I stared at it, bewildered, wondering if the thing had been following me this close the whole time. The thought freaked me out, to be honest. In a matter of seconds, the creature grunted and huffed at me, ran at a frightening speed toward me, and rammed its bent horns into my stomach. I feared for my life. At that moment, I thought I was dying. Instead of continuing the attack, instead of beating me to death, it stomped away in the snow, the same direction I had been heading before I turned back. I picked myself up and ran away. I also promised myself to never mention this to anyone in person. It is the most absurd story I've ever heard, but it happened to me. This intelligent, evil creature seems to love nothing more than to torment people. It savors the fear it brings on us, and I think we all know if it wanted to, it could harm us. It could probably take our lives, but that's just not as fun for it. Well, not yet anyway. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks. Have a story like these? Send it to us at darknessprevails.org. Tell us a scary story.